kick it off.
I will kick it off, and get ready, brace yourselves, because this is the highly caffeinated version of an introduction. Are you ready? Here we go. It is DLT Friday. It's the most high energy show in distributed ledger technology. Or maybe it's Dubai ledger technology. I don't know, because this is Gordon Einstein coming to you live from beautiful Dubai. But I'm not the real beautiful one. I want to introduce my co-host, Mr. James Haft. James, I'm so happy to see you again. It's been a little while since we did this show, but you brought it back strong, my friend, with our theme of Focus on Asia. Just real quick, I'm a crypto attorney. That's all I'm going to say about my profession, because we really care about the guests. But we're going to go to James first, so you can introduce yourself. Go.
So good morning. Thank you all for coming and spending your time with us. Today, we're going to talk about what's happening in Asia. Asia's been, from the United States, there's a natural tendency to think that everything important, emanates out of the States. And the truth is, in the crypto and the DLT world, Asia has really been leading the way quietly and providing really the demand pull and the strength in the markets. So we have with us today two friends who I've known for several years each, who are both movers and shakers, and really lucky to have Omer Ozden from RockTree and Tsang from Tsangs Group. If you guys would just take a minute, just introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the conversation. Omer?
Thanks, James. So my name is Omer Ozden. I'm chairman of RockTree Capital. We're in Beijing, Shanghai, and also New York and Toronto. What we do is we merchant bank projects, which are at the nexus of North America and Greater China. That includes some equity deals. We partner with Gen Fund, which is the top angel fund in Beijing, on high growth equity deals. So we co-founded China's version of WeWork, for example, and we had some IPOs of Chinese mobile e-commerce companies last year. But 75% of what we do is blockchain and crypto. And so we help take Western projects that we invest into, and we help accelerate them in Greater China, because it's kind of like a black box for a lot of Western companies, a lot of Western projects. And we do the same for Chinese projects going international. And I think that's really important because, China is a really important part of the blockchain world that sometimes is not understood. Sometimes the relationships are not there, or it's Mars and Venus in terms of communication. And for a blockchain project to be truly international, it really needs to develop itself in China. I think it's really important. And, we help do that for projects.
Patrick?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, James and Jane, for inviting me, PALcapital. Thanks to Gordon for being the host, and Omer, great to meet you. I'm physically in Dubai right now. My name is Tsang. I'm the chairman of Tsangs Group. We're a single family.
Sorry, Patrick, are you right down the street from me? I think I can see you.
Maybe.
I'm in Dubai. I'm in Dubai also.
Great.
Let me know if you can see me wave, but go ahead, please.
You guys are going to be good drinking buddies, I could tell already.
You know what? I'm ready. He looks like a cool guy. Patrick, sorry, go ahead.
Patrick, make him drink Mao Tai, please.
Of course. So, I run a single family office in Hong Kong. We have offices in Beijing, Shenzhen, and London. So we're very China focused. We either invest into companies in China with a view of going global, or invest into non-Chinese companies, usually in North America or Europe. And then we take the companies into the Chinese market, and our exit is usually IPO in Hong Kong, London, or New York. We usually typically invest into early stage ventures. We're very opportunistic. We're sector and location agnostic in terms of we're very opportunistic. But in recent years, we focused more on China, Hong Kong, UK, and the US. I think there's a lot of opportunity in Asia. It is Asia-centric. And I think there's a lot of things to talk about in terms of the US-China relationship. Asia, which part of Asia, how should I invest into Asia? And I've been having a lot of conversations over the years of people who haven't been to Asia, don't really understand, what Asia is about, the people, the culture, the business, the work ethic. So I would like to talk about a bit about it more generally. In terms of crypto and blockchain, that's how I met James in a number of years. We've done some stuff together. Very, very appreciative of the blockchain technology. We're not experts in crypto per se. We do hold some positions. We have a small arm under the group called Block T Ventures, which we invest into smaller VC companies in the space. And I think James mentioned earlier offline that he wanted to talk about, what makes us get up in the morning and the passion more than the business first. So very happy to do so and share some of my thoughts to the audience.
One of the things I used to run corporate finance for Bear Stearns in Hong Kong, back before the times of electricity in '89 to '93, and one of the things that we realized was when the Chinese government banned something, the first thing you should do is buy it. And that ended up being a really good strategy over the last 30 years. So is that still holding true now, Patrick? Because you keep reading about blockchains being communications, money transfer, all these things being outlawed, and then they become $10 billion businesses. So what's your take on that?
I think it still holds some truth to it, but I think, as you know, that China has advanced and grown so much in the last 40 years that it's slowly becoming, or not even slowly, quite quickly becoming a more developed market. I think China is still known to be a developing country, where I absolutely don't really agree with that. It's just that there is still a lot of people in poverty, but in the main cities along the coast, the major cities, we see it no different to being in Dubai, like where Gordon and I am right now, and you see how the growth in actually Dubai and the UAE and the Middle East region, from nothing in the desert, they've turned it into a mega city. Everything's the biggest, the tallest, the strongest. So Asia is definitely the continent to do so. I think it's a little bit like children. The more you tell the kids not to do something, the more they're going to do it. Mm-hmm. And we've also recently seen, obviously, the Wall Street bets movement, where big title shift between Wall Street and the people. And I think that's usually what happens when you ban something in China or in some of the other countries like Russia, for instance. Then people typically jump on the bandwagon, and then things rocket up.
Oh, Omer, where it's so China has always been related to as an emerging market and a developing market. At what point do you think we're no longer do we admit that China's actually advanced? And
I mean, that should have happened 15 years ago. I first moved to Taiwan in '91, and I moved to Beijing in '96. And I moved to Zhongguancun, which is the Silicon Valley part of China, and it was dirt roads at that time. Okay, and today it looks like downtown Tokyo. But really, like by 2005, 2006, I mean, it was pretty close to being a developed nation, and certainly like over the past 10 years it is. So, you can't really look at it like how we've looked at things traditionally. There's still a lot of poverty in China, but if you look at the economies along the coast, I mean, a lot of the provinces are G8 nations in themselves. So China is a developed nation if you look at it from that perspective. And
that's the challenge, right? Do you look at it on the aggregate, or do you look at it on the per capita? And the answer probably is both. You just have to take everything into account.
I mean, you can't ignore that there's 400 or 500 million people who qualify for what would be a developed nation. I mean, it's a developed continent. It's a developed multiple nations in terms of population size. So yeah, you can look at it whatever you want, but if you're going to look at it from the entire population perspective, you're going to miss out in terms of where China is today, or even 15 years ago. Even 15 years ago.
And is it getting easier to do business in China? Because back, when I was there, forever ago, it was hard to do business in China. I was continually meeting with people from Norinco and from the military, and I had to make, calls to government entities just to meet with industrial leaders. Patrick, is the friction reducing? Is it becoming more open to outsiders?
I think it is. And it isn't. I think it is because there's just more foreigners, more foreign investment into China. China has opened up somewhat, but I think there's a lot of things that still don't work out quite well in China for a lot of foreigners. Is that, I always believe that any country you go to, not just China, but emerging markets, if you don't have a strong local partner that you trust, then I find it very difficult for you to succeed in China or other places. And then secondly, I think More importantly is I think a lot of people think that they have a great business or a successful business model that's running in America and Europe or wherever place they may be. And they think they can just transfer the business, translate it into Chinese, into the language, the website, and bring it over, and it just works. And sometimes that just doesn't happen. In fact, most of the time it doesn't happen. You need to be able to adapt. Just like Chinese food restaurants in America or in Europe, you have to adapt to the palate of the Western tongue. And as a result, you have to adapt the business model and how Chinese people, Chinese consumer behaves in order for your business model to maybe succeed.
Does money move differently in China than it does in the United States, in business or consumer?
Moves faster.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. It moves faster. And, there's certain things that relate to convertibility of renminbi, which are restrictions, but domestically, I mean, when I first moved there, it was an all cash society. Very few people had credit cards, and you do transactions with like a big bag of renminbi, and people would be counting it really fast. And now
it's almost Weimar style.
Exactly. And exactly. Yeah. Like that. Except for the inflation. But in our U-commune locations, I remember these are the co-working locations we have in China. I remember we transformed from all cash to just digital payments in a matter of like 3 months. Everything became digital payments. And that was like 5 years ago. And so you can't use cash. It's very difficult to use cash today. Everything is transformed. Things move really fast. Everything's digital payments. I think that when we work with projects from the West, like we say, guys, you're from New York, great, whatever, you're from London, but you got to go on China speed. China moves faster than even the fastest locations in the West, period. That's it.
And is that with respect to getting deals done?
I think it's making decisions, taking risk, without being over analytical. Like there's definitely advantages of a Western style of analyzing things, but like there's always the danger of over analyzing, and definitely we do that. Contracts are like this thick when they can be like 10 pages instead of 100. All those things like just get in the way. They're frictions for business, and so there's strengths to each way of doing business. But I agree with Patrick. Like when you're in China, you got to do it the Chinese way. Don't try to come in and say, okay, this works great in Oklahoma and it's going to work great in Jiangsu. Like it just doesn't work that way. So you got to be very, very local in your approach. Very local.
So I'm speaking from, I have to admit, Asia ignorance. What I've heard as a lawyer is that part of the reason the contracts are so short is that almost signing the contract is the beginning of the negotiation, the relationship, not the end, and it kind of evolves over the course of the relationship. Whether when you take a more Western perspective, the contract is the deal, and it's considered quite the thing if you go against the terms. Is there any reality to that?
Yeah, so I'm an attorney by background too. I did a number of IPOs for the Chinese .coms, and we did VC deals for them too. And like, it depends what level you're working at. If you're working at an institutional level and sort of like internationally educated level, then the contract is the contract, like that's it. But if you're working really locally, and particularly the closer you get to, let's say, guys who just haven't had international exposure, or if they're closer to even the government, for example, SOEs and so forth. I mean, I think it's not a concept of contracts, like it's a concept of time. So when the contract is signed, there's never an intent at that time to change the deal. It's just situations a year later end up changing, and now we have to like change this around, which is a very different concept from what traditional Western style is, where like, this is the deal, you got to do it, right? And I think like it's more fluid in China, where things change, and that's the way it is. And that's like quite shocking for a lot of Western businesses, but that's just the way it goes.
Patrick, what are your thoughts?
I agree with what Gordon said. I think there's some truth to that. I think the contract sometimes is the start negotiations. I think Omer's hit it on the spot. I think it really depends on the situation. Generally, if you're dealing with CITIC, Bank of China, the big boys, then they adopt, the international rules and laws, and they do have proper contracts with international law firms. But when you get to local government level or like the local SMEs, then a lot of the time, even if you sign a contract, there are a lot of instances where they might not honor the contract. So that's why at the end of the day, it's a bit of a cliche. We always hear this is like the relationship is the key.
Interesting.
And then, sorry, James, let me just ask you, I'm just fascinated by this topic. And then what's the level of commercial contract enforceability, especially if you're not local in the courts or otherwise? Either.
So I think Gordon wants to know, like, if things go wrong, what happens?
Can you actually realistically enforce your contract?
I'll let Patrick answer that.
Did I throw out a bomb there without realizing it? I mean,
I would say over the years, over the years in China, this has improved. You have to remember that China's only have 70, 80 years of history in terms of like modern China. That's why the laws are still not as sophisticated or as comprehensive as they are in the UK or in the US. So China is still a relatively new country. The laws are still coming into place, but I think the Chinese government realized that in order for them to attract foreign investment and in order that people can see transparency, they're trying to do as much as possible for the enforcement. But I still have to say that we still have probably, in my opinion, another generation to go before you'll get to more Western standards of proper enforcement of contracts.
When I was in China, we used to say that they had a different definition of exclusive. Exclusive meant exclusively to the first person that gives me the money. But I think it's gotten better. But the reality is that I always felt that possession was 9/10 of the law when I was in China. That if you didn't have the possession of the asset, if you didn't have the entitlement, it's very hard to dig yourself out of that hole if you're not local and you're not wired into the system. Because the old saying in the United States is, a good lawyer knows the law, a great lawyer knows the judge, right? And I think the same thing's in China, whereas, the strong businessman knows the law, but the really, the guy that's really successful tends to have deeper roots, in the power structure to deliver. So what's changed? What's the bleeding edge right now, Patrick, in China? What's the place where China is pushing the envelope ahead of where the US and Europe are looking right now?
I think what Omer previously mentioned is, the speed at which China is developing. I think things like smart city, biotech, AI, big data, cybersecurity, EV, electric vehicles, the batteries, all these kind of like, high tech areas is growing very fast. Like artificial intelligence is going, beyond faster than the US. Just like to add a few things regarding that. And the reason why China is doing better than the US, why it's faster in this regard is, there's more people in China, there's more data. Secondly, is that there's more consent from the people to allow the data being analyzed and used. And thirdly, I think there's, the concept of privacy is probably not as important to the Chinese as it is to their Western counterparts, because they sort of realize that the Chinese government is, has access to your data, so they don't really care about whether you use my data. And then fourthly is they're very curious to try out new apps or new business models. That's why there's been a lot of big adoption of super apps like WeChat, Douyin, which is like the TikTok equivalent in China.
Patrick, do you think that the Chinese are going to start to value privacy and and individual rights more, or do you think that basically it's almost ingrained now just the last 80 years?
I think there will be change, James. It will take time. I think that people are, as Omer knows, people in China's, in the last 30 years or so, 700 million people have, been removed from poverty, where they've moved from the villages to the cities, which means that people now have a TV, a microwave, a mobile phone, at least they're not starving, they have a job. People are reasonably content because at least they have a chance of, putting food on the table. And as a result, us as human beings, whether you're Chinese or not, all we want is a good family life, putting your kids into a good school, they get educated, and hopefully they don't have to toil as hard as their parents did. So in this respect, what will happen is people will become more educated. The middle class has already grown so much. And as a result, people demand things such as education. We've seen in the last 10, 15 years, the way that the Chinese have, traveled to New York, to Paris, to London, to buy in Harrods and Champs-Élysées in Fifth Avenue. And that's been a massive, massive change of traveling from the Chinese and the spending. And later on, the next generation will be more educated. They will be demanding more things such as rights and privacy and content. And it'll be interesting to see how the Chinese government will adapt and adopt different ways of governing.
It's interesting. I always think things are fractals. If it's if you understand the little pieces, you have to understand the big piece. And I've always looked at emerging markets, as a pathway, as in motion. And you're kind of describing, China as the, looking for the Chinese looking for the American dream that we would have talked about in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I think that China's just racing through the changes faster than we did. Because of the more freer availability of communication, but also just because, I think it's an intensely capitalist society. When you get through, when I was in China, I was always fascinated by how hard people worked and how, really the basic ethic of work and family and education was so tightly wound into the culture. It's a huge advantage. So I have to get to distributed ledger a little bit because you guys know that I'm totally, jumped down that rabbit hole. So Omer, what's happening in terms of digital money in China? Is there a difference between the United States and China and how people are looking at digital money?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So like I said, approximately 4 years ago in the major centers, we already transferred from being cash to cashless, and it's almost like entirely cash to completely cashless society. So that's based on apps, and that's based on fiat currency, and then so that conditioning is already done. Like we're in terms of at least like 2 layers, we're already cashless, digital. But then to get into blockchain technology and to actually have a digital currency itself, I mean, you take a look at the market cap of USDT and so forth, and you see like what's being used for commerce between China and Russia and like many other jurisdictions as well, and Asia in general. And then you add on top of that now the digital Rmb, which has been it's amazing. Like that project started, I think, about 5 years ago, and then in 2017. They delayed it because of the policy came out. But then when President Xi came out with the speech in October of 2019, I mean, they expedited it. It's rolled out today and being used in certain locations on a retail basis. I mean, people are using it. And, to add to Patrick's point, like, I think the most beautiful thing about China and the biggest advantage it has is that it's a population of early adopters. So we're talking now about DLT, about blockchain. Chinese will embrace it. Chinese are embracing it. We're talking about crypto and digital currency. Chinese will embrace it. They are embracing it. And it's not just like in the United States where it's the 14 to 35-year-old groups. Like it's 7-year-olds up to 75-year-olds all doing it. That's the amazing thing. So it's all inclusive and pervasive as well.
Are they adopting it per se, or are they adopting apps that have it as the back end because the apps are available?
I think both. Like the good thing is that, that's definitely like the apps are available. And frankly, like without those apps, you can't survive in China. Like that's period. Like you can't live. And so if you lose your WeChat account, you got a problem. You lose your cell phone, you got a problem in China. Going down to even being able to eat. Like
just to jump in, that kind of, whether you meant to or not, interfaces with the social credit system a little bit. Is there any forced removal of WeChat accounts? Or is that almost like a built-in DNA right at this point?
No, that happens. Like if you know you have to make sure, like just like you have to make sure you don't lose your phone in a taxi. You have to be careful, like in terms of like losing your phone by not following the rules. So that's an important piece there. And so like that's within the society. But I think even more importantly, like people embrace it. People want to do it. Like you can't tell everybody in the United States, okay, here's WeChat, you have to use WeChat. A lot of people just won't do it. Like I know my parents, like they, even email is sometimes difficult for them. They're not gonna, and teaching them to like use WhatsApp and so forth, they can
Or even something like crazy, like we're in the middle of a pandemic, wear a mask.
Right.
Heaven
Exactly.
forbid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. People have gotten too comfortable in a lot of like markets, and there's a hunger to learn, hunger to progress and adopt in China and other Asian countries too. So it's very powerful.
And so right now, the friction between the U.S. and China, as the U.S. It keeps at least mouthing the words that it wants to stay in a leadership position, is that friction from the ground up in China, or is it from the top down? When I was there, the Chinese loved Americans. No matter what was happening with the governments, they wanted to be in the United States. They wanted their kids to go to school in the United States. Is that still there, Patrick, or is it starting to become the magic garden, the secret garden?
I would say this, I think on two fronts. I think if you have an American who visits China and vice versa, when you have a Chinese visit an American as people, I think American and Chinese people love each other. I think we're both of cultures that we love, welcoming guests to our country and showing, the guests how beautiful our country and the culture is from both sides, right? And I think the conflict here is, between governments. And what we've seen in the US, we've seen the Democrats and Republicans. And one thing that's actually bound the two big parties together in America is actually sort of like the anti-China sentiment. Whether you're Republican, whether you agreed with Biden or Trump, everyone sort of agreed that, China is a threat. And secondly, in China itself, I think both from the government and also from a sort of inborn DNA of the Chinese, like at least the native Chinese in China, they also have, I wouldn't say a hatred towards America, but there's a sort of a
resentment, probably.
Resentment is probably a good word. A resentment of the American government, of the way that they think it's unfair of how the American government is perceiving China and painting China's picture to the world. So they think it's very unfair. I think from the Chinese side, there's a lot of the time, it's a very interesting culture. Chinese people don't really like comparing themselves to others because they just think that it's China and everyone else. So they don't think, China's better than America or not better than America. They just think China's China and everyone is the rest. Right. Where I think in a lot of Western cultures, for example, in the US, for example, people like to tend to compare to each other like it's a race. But I think ultimately it's not a race. I think we can work together, live together. I think America needs China. China needs America. And I think, 10, 20 years ago, the US system, the US education system, the MBA, the business schools, probably the US is the #1 in the world and still is, and probably still is for some time. And I think the Chinese parents love to get the children to be able to have the Chinese values, but then send them off to Harvard, get through law school, the business school, and then what we call them as like sea turtles. These guys are then educated. They have the best of both worlds, and then they migrate back to China to do so. But recently, because of COVID, because of the anti-China sentiment from the West, especially in the US, from Trump administration and all that, we've seen a big drop of Chinese, not just in America, but the Chinese in general, sending their kids off to the US because they think that, these guys are not welcoming us. So I think there's a bit of emotion attached to that. And as a result, less students from China are actually going overseas. And obviously add that to COVID, because of safety reasons, China is probably a safer place to be than in the West right now. So a lot of children, because the parents are very conservative in China, they would like to not send the kids to overseas. So there's been a lot more growth in domestic education. I'm not sure if Omer agrees to that.
I think, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think that really this is temporal. The question is like, if you ask the question 5 years ago, you get a different answer than, let's say, today, or even 2 years ago, or maybe 2 years from now. So, you know, we're living in a very strange time. COVID, trade war, the Trump administration just recently, and so forth. So I think like, you know, certain types of uh, animosity or resentment has like developed, but we'll see if it's a long-term thing. Like I think basically, you know, if just in terms of the general image of America in China, like it's, I mean, 美国, it means beautiful country. Like that's the name. That's how you. That's the name for U.S. in China, and so you know, there's like an admiration, but also like there's definitely a deep-seated uh, feeling of things aren't being treated fairly, and that goes back like historically in China in terms of unfair treaties and you know, different Western countries getting together and colluding against China and so forth. So I think that definitely is like increased over the past, you know, 12 to 24 months. And, but, you know, like one thing I want to say to get back to James and DLT and what you were saying, like blockchain, the beautiful thing about blockchain is that it's a global phenomena. And when I'm with my brothers in Beijing and Shanghai, the things we talk about and the way we think is the same as when I'm with my brothers in New York or, you know, Dubai or wherever it is. Like there's an international culture there, and it's young, it's progressive, it's technology based, it's driven by profit and also by development and growth and learning fast. And so that, like, the beautiful thing about blockchain is a lot of times, like it can, you know, circumvent all that BS and all that confusion that's out there. And so that's why I really enjoy it. It's
Can I make a comment? Just, I think you guys are, just be real blunt, I think you're being way too optimistic about the long-term trend of the relationship. I think when at the moment there's sort of a duopoly and much more, and China needs the US for the public goods it provides to keep the sea lanes open, for the capital and for the technology, and you know, a distant fourth is lifestyle choice for the princelings and everyone else. I think when the US in 10, 15 years, I mean, who knows with COVID now, it's accelerating, falls behind China and falls behind India, that's not going to be of interest anymore. And I think the just be real blunt, and I love the US, but this is where I see it going. I think they're going to decouple to a certain extent, not necessarily out of any hostility, but just because the US will continue losing relative importance over time. And the big challenge, I think, is to avoid I think it's the Thucydides trap or whatever it is right now, when Sparta rose up against Athens and they got in a horrible war. I'd like us to get past the next 10 years without having a war. And I'm not thrilled about the U.S. declining, but I think this is where it's heading. And you know, that Omer, to your point, that does not at all preclude us as individuals or us as economic entities collaborating with each other and producing a great future. I'm in here, Dubai, working with everyone right now. You know, Chinese, Russian, Orthodox Jews from everywhere, Israelis. It's like, you know, you should see the parties we're at. It's like, you know, this is like a little model United Nations where everyone actually gets along. It's kind of cool. But I think the beautiful country idea is sort of based on a 1960s, at the latest 1970s thing, and with the political situation in the United States and COVID and sort of the dampening of the future, that's the shines can come off at some point. And this final point, you know, the year that China's GDP was going to surpass the US's apparently got accelerated by 3 or 4 years now because of COVID. And some things, you know, when they go one direction, they don't necessarily snap back. I mean, sometimes that's it. You know, Carthage is never going to rise again. And I am not sure that all these Chinese students will actually return to the US in anything like the numbers that they did before. They might want to get their EB-5 visas. They might want to keep their money offshore, like any good, you know, public official wants to these days. You know, they have these bare naked officials, whatever they call them. But I think the shine's off the US. I'm not sure it's coming back. So I hope it doesn't get into a shooting war. So that's my take, and you can argue with it or nod at it or whatever.
So just if I could say, like, James, one of the first questions is like, what are you super passionate about?
Right.
What do you wake
Go
up in the
for it.
morning? And for me personally, and this is the ethos of RockTree, it's bringing together groups to work together, and like groups that would be Mars, Venus, like maybe don't even speak the same language, or, you know, have a different, like definitely geographically different, but just bringing those parties together. And it's kind of like a mixed baby, like they're beautiful because you have such strengths on one end and strengths on the other. And if you can bridge that together, you build something really beautiful. And, you know, a lot of things that in China where it has mixed with like top tier foreign, US, international, like it's built beautiful things. You know, we did the VIE structures for you know, opening up the internet in China, and that allowed foreign investments. So Alibaba, Baidu, we did all those deals. They created the biggest some of the biggest companies in China that's pervasive, and like biggest companies in the world. And that occurred not only because of China, but like there was a mix of ideas and capital and taking risk and so forth. And so that's a great thing. So that type of thing really makes me passionate. I love that. And I think, you know, we have to accept responsibility for that at an international level. Sorry, at an individual level. Like Patrick has to do that. I have to do that. James, Gordon, you have to do that. And like, you know, where you two are right now, Dubai is a microcosm of that too. Dubai, like they created an ecosystem that was like somewhat similar to America. Like it's a merit-based economy, rule of law, and multicultural. I mean, no oil in Dubai, and it produced a miracle.
Isn't it amazing here? Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like it's amazing. And New York is like that too. And Hong Kong is like that, exactly like that. So the more you become like that, I think the more you flourish. And US closing itself off is not a good thing. But also China is doing exactly that right now too. Like it's taking a very closed position and like at an accelerated rate. So, you know, that's not good for the world. That's not good for America. It's not good for China, period.
How do we, in this COVID lockdown world, how do we maintain this Dubai-like vibe of individuals, people collaborating in this way that benefits, that keeps on things open and moving? I mean, I don't know that's China specific, just like I'm struggling with this a little bit. Like, you know, we all need to work together to get things done. And it's a beautiful thing when it happens. I mean, you know what's so neat here? I mean, like they just made relations with Israel, and you're seeing Israeli and Middle Eastern companies, and like the explosion of commerce is amazing. And I'd love to see that happen with the larger countries also, and keep on rolling. I don't know. I'll just throw that out there. Patrick, maybe you want to comment?
I think it's a great question, Gordon. I think, you know, no one knows the answer. I think you know, this whole COVID situation will probably last another year and a half. I'm sure some people listening to this will probably think, well, you know, is that really going to happen? I just feel that most of the governments globally are this is one thing. Every government has their own agenda, and every government has a different reason, and they're very inconsistent. So unless all the countries come together and have a consistent way of doing this, unless everyone is vaccinated, or two is because of the vaccination, or, you know, the numbers coming down because of lockdown or borders being shut, we're not going to really see much improvement. And as a result of that, the only way you can do this is you have to adapt by using Zoom, or just staying in your home country and then using the business model in your home country, or you go somewhere else where it's more free and easy to do business, such as Dubai, which is the reason why I've been here. So the reason I was actually here was I arrived on the 14th of January, thinking of spending 2 weeks in Dubai to get 2 weeks so that I could fly from London to the US. And I had to go through Dubai. There was not many other places I could go to. Hong Kong, we now have a 3-week hotel quarantine. I got here in 2 weeks. And then the chop that I needed would be the 29th of January, which is when I would fly to the US. But since Biden came into power, he wanted to enforce a 26th of Jan hotel 10-day quarantine for all visitors into the US. So as a result, one of my partners went to the US ahead of me, got the thing done, so I didn't actually end up going. So I'm on the 5th week here in Dubai. I'm thinking of probably staying here for another at least few weeks, maybe 2 months even, because it's the place that, as Gordon knows, is that you can have face-to-face meetings. People here are very interesting because we have a mixture of East and West, where everyone's wearing a mask. You know, you get all the expat guys who are not as crazy in terms of drinking, partying, and, you know, it's spreading less. And as a result, we can have actually, you know, proper, sensible people like ourselves that we can actually sit face to face and do deals. And because people are here, people tend to be in a little bit of like a holiday mode. So people are more generous and less guarded in terms of like signing checks or doing deals. So it's been a great few weeks for us in terms of business and seeing old friends. And most of London and Europe are here because, you know, they can't be in their respective countries. So I think, you know, you have to be patient and just adapt to the situation and just make the most of it. Hopefully, you know, if the vaccinations go well, they'll have to like launch some kind of vaccine passport program so people can start traveling again. Otherwise, we're going to have the same kind of like lockdown restriction for the next 6 to 12 months minimum.
You know what's interesting is that nobody on this call is actually sitting in their home jurisdiction, right? Omer's in Tulum, and Patrick and Gordon are in Dubai, and I'm in Vermont, right? So it's really interesting that the globalization has really happened, and in the past there was always this concept that everyone was going to be unemployed, you know, and replaced by technology. And then there was the optimistic perspective that the new technologies were going to create new opportunities for productivity that was going to, you know, so the pie would grow and there'd be more to share. And I think we're kind of seeing that. So
just, James, before we get into that, I just want to also answer Gordon's question, because I think it's a really important one. Like, where do we go from here? And like, just my personal opinion at a very, very high level is it's a four-letter word, which is love, like LOVE, like love of humanity, love of people, love of individuals, your relationships, your family. And when you have that, then you can overcome a lot of things. And like right now, I think there's an agenda by a lot of people like in governments and power to have another four-letter word, which is fear. And everybody's in like a general state of trepidation globally, and some places more than others. And that makes people make bad decisions and easier to be controlled. We all know that. And also like you start fearing the unknown, and that makes people separate. And we already are separated because of this, but like, you know, the other thing that's kind of brought us together, which is great, is another four-letter word, which is Zoom. And so like, you know, like right after this, we're having a class for my daughter and it's her birthday, and I'm getting on there through Zoom and reading a book for all the kids. Like I wouldn't be able to do that before, right? So Zoom can bring us together, and other technologies can bring us together in ways that we weren't able to come together before. It's not a replacement, but like now, you know, we're just chatting in 4 disparate places around the world, covering almost every region, talking about Asia. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Patrick, how deep is the damage that was done over the last 4 years by the misinformation and, you know, fear, you know, really the fear mongering, as Omer's pointing it out? Do you think that that's permanent, going to have a permanent imprint on the relationship with China and the Chinese people in the United States?
I think let's talk about the US first. I think there's something that one of my mentors, Steve Norris, always talks about. He said the American mindset is very, you know, you guys live by super bold. And I think that's quite true. I think, you know, Americans have a short memory in terms of they're focused more on what's happening now and the sort of like immediate past of what's happening. So, you know, I think what Omer is saying is totally correct. I think, you know, LOVE is very important. And, you know, if we work together more from the Chinese and the US side, there definitely is a possibility of, you know, forgetting all of that. I think a lot of Chinese, they associate a lot of the American anti-China sentiment with the Trump administration. So now that Trump is gone, I think China, the government, will try its best to try and do whatever it takes to mend the relationship somewhat. And I think the people will also forget it as well. Not all of it, but some of it. And I think this will help improve relations. However, on the pessimistic side, because we have two competing powers. I think there's something what Gordon was mentioning. I think it's the Thucydides theory, which is
You're
when
saying it better than I did.
the rising power against the existing power. And I think 14 times or 16 times in the last 2,000 years, it's went into war. And I think one of the last times it didn't happen was when the US overtook the UK, the British Empire, as the #1 power. And that was because they had a common language, common culture that allowed them to sort of like make peace. And, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have between the US and China, I think ultimately is culture. I think a lot of the time the Americans try to use the American system on the Chinese, and then the Chinese try to think about what they think on the Americans using the Chinese way of thinking. But I always give this analogy that the whole thing is very different. I think, number one is we use chopsticks, Westerners use knives and forks, but more deep than that is let's use the example of language. When we mention James and I are on a Zoom call regarding Asia, right? In like a Chinese language or an Asian language, we would say Asian topic, Zoom call, we're on it, James, I. That's how we structure the sentence, right? And the reason for that is in Western culture, we talk a lot about ourselves, the individual. So it's always me, it's James and I, we're the subject. And the most important thing is Asia, the topic. In the Chinese language, we always talk about the topic. And in the end, it's James and I, we're just like minuscule particles of the universe, right? And it's not saying the Chinese way is right or the American way is wrong. It's just a different way of looking at it. And I think a lot of the time this misunderstanding is when I use my kind of thoughts on you and you use your kind of thoughts on me. And that's where misunderstandings and assumptions happen. And that's why, things can get worse if we don't have enough dialogue. So I think there's hope, but I think obviously because politicians are the guys that make these things happen. And unfortunately, politicians usually make things worse.
Through this at you, just a slight subject shift. The One Belt, One Road, to what does that integrate with blockchain and DLT at all? Are you seeing any hothouse like activity associated with that? Is there an opportunity there?
Yeah, so something that James and I were talking about earlier, there's a project that we're both involved in. We did the founding investment into Casper Labs. It's a new layer 1 that's going to be doing their mainnet next month. And we just
James and I are intimately involved. So we're with you.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Both of you know. So, like this took some time, but we set up a joint venture partnership with BSN, which is the China's national blockchain, between Casper and China's national blockchain. And so like China's national blockchain, BSN, is the biggest national blockchain in the world. And there will never be a number 2 that can, because it's got such a first mover advantage. It's supported from the very top. America hasn't even thought about this yet. There's not even a white paper on it yet. And we've talked to Congress about it a few times and so forth. And I mean, it's so far behind. And so you have a situation now where you have One Belt, One Road. You've got all these countries along Asia into Europe, Africa, and so forth, where their largest trading partner is China. And perhaps before it was America or England or something like that. And you have a blockchain, you've got a digital currency, and you merge those two to bring in trade logistics, trade finance, just in time, everything that can be done on the blockchain, Web3, instantly, without friction. I mean, it's a game changer, and that's what's coming, just with respect to trade finance and logistics and so forth. So, One Belt, One Road, I mean, it's a backbone, and here's the digital backbone. So there's a actual digital Silk Road being built now too.
And are they directly linked, or is the Chinese national blockchain literally countrywide, including but not specifically One Belt, One Road?
I think there are 200 nodes within China, and then there are a number of nodes internationally, and then So for example, Casper and Ethereum and maybe one or two others like internationally have connected to the BSN. And so that's the approach internationally, to work with the top projects internationally, and domestically, you've got like at least 200 cities being nodes. So it's pervasive within China as well.
Because it'd be fascinating as the infrastructure spreads west and south, if the network nodes went along with it. Like, if you had in Gwadar, Pakistan, the port they're building out, it would be interesting if that were a network node for this international blockchain and was facilitating the trade, or for all these inland ports on the way over to Europe. Or I think it's Piraeus, that Greek port that is heavily involved. It'd be neat if that was all, if there was physical infrastructure there, but it'd be neat if there was network infrastructure there that was inherently part of it, so they became inseparable.
Yeah, I mean,
it's an interesting vision.
It's happening.
And what advantages is BSN going to bring to China? I mean, I see there's that whether it's intentional or just incidental, that there's a battle between what's the base layer for currency, what's the base layer for trade.
Oh, sure.
And communication globally, and I see that as right now it's a friction between the U.S. and China, and so where are we in that process? And do you think we end up with something which is open and shared by all globally, or do you think we end up with something where where someone wins?
I think the beautiful thing about technology, and even with blockchain, is it's based on consensus, which means that for most intents and purposes, it tends to be a meritocracy. You had competing, let's say Russia, like Soviet Union and United States 40 years ago. I mean, you had TVs in both of the countries, but or refrigerators, but it was clear which country had better types of appliances and so forth. And so with technology, people in China want Apple. It's a great technology. And you're not going to get an operating system at that level in China, period. People know that. And so, people move, it's a meritocracy. So on blockchain, right now, China, because it's supported at the very top, you have the most filings of patents of any nation in China with respect to blockchain over the past 2 or 3 years. And it's growing. And you've got a BSN. The good thing is it allows for people to work on the blockchain and develop blockchain dApps for cheap. It's quite economical and quite easy to set up, which is a good thing because it allows enterprise to move in. And the best part of it is, and this is what we really need in the United States. Okay, this is what we really need the United States and globally too, is you need from the very top to say, this is great, we're endorsing it. Because right now it's especially crypto, but even blockchain itself, it's you're coming out of the closet. Elon Musk has to now reveal that he's in Bitcoin, and it's okay to talk about it.
And Dogecoin. Don't forget Dogecoin.
Right, exactly.
I mean, come on, that
exactly.
That's the news. Yeah.
Right. So from a blockchain perspective, all the SMEs, all the SOEs, they know that this is the technology to go into. So everybody's developing on it. All companies have a budget. There's on the Shenzhen Stock Exchange, there's an actual index for blockchain related companies. I mean, way more advanced than what we're having in the United States or other countries right now. So that's a big difference. But again, going back to consensus, the what's developing in China, let's say from a government level, or what might develop in Denmark from a government level, or from we don't know what people are going to like. And certain people like decentralized networks. Some people like centralized networks, permission-based, permissionless, and so forth. And so, in China, typically the way the government's worked in the past 70 years is they can socially engineer this and they can bring this out, but like a one baby system or something, but you're going to get resistance if that's not what people really like. So with blockchain, you're going to have competing protocols, you're going to have competing consensus mechanisms, and people will move to what they like. that's a good thing.
I mean, think about it. If all these new platforms are consensus engines, right? That really is the difference. The reliance on the wisdom of the crowd and to be able to democratize, go peer to peer, and gain consensus so that you can have truth without trusting kind of concept. Think of what a huge advantage China has, right? If that's what matters, it's easier to pick up 10 million users in China than it is in the United States, right? There's 200 cities with over 1 million people in China. There's 5 in the United States, right? So, Patrick, where do you see the blue ocean? Where do you see the areas right now where there's hunger in China and where it's not yet being satisfied?
I think, like I said before earlier, I think the industries that we will see a lot is fintech, biotech. I think AI, robotics. I think electric cars, autonomous driving, and even space travel will be huge in China in the next 10 years. I think we're going to see a big seismic shift in the next 5-10 years in China of the tech. I think we've got to a stage where in the past, China are very good at taking technology from others and improving them by making them faster, cheaper, and better. But I think it's time where, because generations have come now, and I think there's actual new technology developed by China, which is from scratch. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this, especially in the AI sector. In terms of poverty, I think because of the fact that there's an advancement by the government, I think recently, I think it was yesterday, Xi Jinping made an announcement saying that we've managed to, I think, bring 100 million people out of poverty. I'm not remember what the exact stat was, but I think that's another major milestone that he wants to do, which is to reduce all poverty from China.
Interesting. Omer, what are you thinking in terms of you talked about a layer 1 solution, which is, fundamental infrastructure. Are there other areas that you think are interesting now for growth and for collaboration?
You mean aside from blockchain?
Yeah.
I mean, every area of technology, mobile e-commerce, China's a leader, period. There's a lot of things that other countries and other markets can learn from it. And so a lot of things like you end up seeing Facebook and WhatsApp and, doing, it was already done in China 2, 3, 4 years earlier. I'm so surprised that you can only on WhatsApp, it's only recently, I think, that you can actually scan each other through QR code when that was going on 5 years ago in China. It's old news. There are certain areas where there's leadership by China, and it's good for the world to learn from that because technology is pervasive and it's for humanity. Biotech, AI, as Patrick mentioned, there's just a lot of areas. I mean, even it would be so great to have a high-speed rail between, let's say, Washington and New York City. When I take the Acela, it's quite
10 minutes faster, 10 minutes faster and twice as expensive.
Right, exactly, and uncomfortable too. But when I'm riding the Gaotie between Beijing and Shanghai, I prefer to take the train between those two cities than an airplane because airplane has delays. I don't get internet, but with the Gaotie, which is the fast bullet train in China, I know exactly door to door what my timing is. And now they're coming up with even the next level of high speed rail in China. So, there's a lot of things that can be shared and learned and collaborated on, I think everywhere, all things.
And Patrick, could you talk about the digital RMB? Because in the US, we don't really understand it yet. Is that like the old, when I was in China, there was FC, which was foreign currency, and there was Rmb, which was for the people, right? And you couldn't trade between the two, although you did. Everywhere you went, you could trade between the two. So is that what's happened? Is that an effort in China to have more control, from the government, or is it a tool for more openness and global trade based on Rmb?
I think it's a combination of the few that you mentioned. Recently, I think 2-3 months ago in Shenzhen, they launched the first pilot scheme where they use a lottery scheme that people would buy a lottery ticket and people would win. And then they would be paid in digital renminbi, and it's been successful. And as you know, in China, the Chinese love to give pilot schemes in certain cities or provinces, and then once it becomes successful in one particular city, then they'll then spread it out into the various other provinces. So this is definitely coming. Second thing is, I think the Chinese government see that they have to be ahead in the blockchain and the decentralized way. So what they believe is that if we're going to allow it, we might as well take over it. Now, I think one thing that'll be quite interesting will be, as Omer mentioned, it was just amazing that when I first went to China, like on business, you get all these wealthy guys with like wads of cash, and then their little handbags would be so big, and then they would count the 100 renminbi bills and give it to the people to pay for the bill. And now it's all on your mobile phone on this, and then later on it's all going to be digital currency. I mean, if you look at it, analyze it, one thing that I think would be very interesting is that later on, all the people in China using the digital renminbi, they will know exactly how you've spent the money, who you've paid the money to, and how much money do you have. So in terms of from a governing perspective, they'll know that must be making $10 million instead of $5 million, which he reported, or that the girlfriend, the hotel bill, and where you buy your stuff, what kind of like stuff do you buy on Alibaba. So again, that big data will also be useful for the government, but I think eventually what will also happen is that Alibaba, Baidu, all the big Tencent, they will also be able to track what you spend your money in, where you spend your money, and all the dynamics of the spending behavior. And again, that will also create another new shift in how consumers will purchase things.
Do you think that they try and push the digital RMB outside of China? Because one of the differences in China and the United States is the Americans were always, for the last century, have been, comfortable with flows in and out of the country. The Chinese have always been, since 30 years that I've been focused, have been very concerned about capital flight. And where you keep your money and where you're reinvesting. Do you think that the digital RMB is going to make the yuan more available globally and possibly used as a unit of trade?
I believe so. I think it's a great point you made, James. I think what will happen is it's one way of internationalizing the RMB. I think it's one way to sort of compete with the US dollar. Instead of like the money flowing out, they'll have a complete record and transaction as to how that renminbi ended up where it is in Pakistan, Africa, or any place that the One Belt, One Road is used. And eventually this will also be some kind of like barter trade between countries and RMB and not be as dependent on the US dollar.
Omer, you were talking before about BSN. Do you think BSN is an attempt to provide the infrastructure for communication and transactions globally, or just within China?
It's global. So like it starts with China, and it's new, right? Like it's President Xi made his pronouncement, like I said, October 2019, and this was launched in around April 2020. So like we're not even 12 months into it, but I mean, it's growing really fast. And so it's domestic and international. And international, the approach is linking up with like the top layer ones.
See, to me, that's the competition that I focus on, is the relevance of the dollar against the RMB globally. The advantage the United States has had for the last century is that this concept of full faith and credit, that that where the risk-free rate is our treasury bond, right? And if China were to I think covertly they're already opening up. But if they were to overtly start to open up and encourage people and give discounts and give support to transactions in the RMB, I think you could see a flippening, as they say in the crypto world, which could have a really important impact on geopolitics. So I kind of watch this thing right now, and I think that people don't realize something's happened until after it's happened. That's just our nature, right? And I wonder if we haven't already reached that point between China and the United States. And I think that we shot ourselves in the foot over the last 4 years, politics aside, that we really abdicated our leadership position, and we showed people that we're not different. You know, it used to be when I was in China, everyone wanted to use the U.S. system because we were governed by laws, right, and that there were consequences, and that there was benefits, you know, to trusting, and that you could trust because it was supposed to be open and transparent and fair. And I think that we showed that we're not that much different. You know, we're all human, and that you can't rely on the full faith and credit. So we're going to wrap up in a few minutes. So Omer, talk to me about, you guys did a great job of not talking about your businesses, but at the end of the sessions, what I like to do is give you a chance to start to talk about, you know, what is it that you're doing at RockTree that's cool, you know, and you know, what do you see coming over the next year or two where people should, you know, pay attention and follow and maybe learn more so they could, you know, so they could benefit with you?
Sure. So what we love, like what I love is taking early stage projects, bringing in the seed investment, bringing in the pieces globally to help incubate it and grow it like a baby and bring it through like certain steps of its evolution. You know, blockchain project, crypto project. You know, we're not strong on the development side, so that already has to be there. But like just the capital market side, the team internationally, making it really international, and particularly like helping accelerate it in China. So, you know, there have been a number of projects we've done like that and continue to do. You know, one of the projects we're working on together is Casper Labs. Like Casper's biggest community today is China, and you know, it's in partnership with the government's national blockchain. We have so many. We have development community, you know, a big following in China, very active. And so that's the type of thing that I think, you know, if you look at success of like Polkadot, even EOS 4 years ago, like it's really because a top tier international project was able to actually, you know, do things on a local basis and Fajan, like develop inside China itself. And so that kind of feeds off each other. You know, you have the network effect, like it's a project starts getting bigger in China, it reverberates back to the West and keeps going like that, and Korea and so forth. And so it becomes a global phenomenon, a global network effect. And I love doing that. I love helping Chinese projects become international. I love helping Western projects really like tailor themselves to be local in China and grow in China. And so the Chinese people can benefit, global, you know, together can work together to build something beautiful. I love doing that.
Patrick, same question to you. What's
yeah,
exciting
so
that you're doing?
We're quite similar to Omer. We invest in early stage ventures, and then we try to incubate and then take them public in Hong Kong and London and New York. This year we're focusing a lot on SPACs in the US. Mainly in technology. We acquired an asset management firm in 2019. We saw, you know, the animosity between the US and China. We saw a lot of Chinese companies which are listed in the American market and on NASDAQ and NYSE. And we saw a space where we would take a lot of these companies to do secondaries in Hong Kong. So we're doing a lot more IPOs in Hong Kong from Chinese companies, and we're offering to Chinese companies listing in Hong Kong. But personally speaking, I'm focusing a lot on the SPAC space in the US this year. There's just a lot of money in the SPAC space, as we know. Every person from Shaq O'Neal to Richard Branson to Richard Lee to Peter Thiel, everyone's on the SPAC bandwagon. And I think there's obviously an opportunity to perhaps do a SPAC for the blockchain tech, which is interesting. But I mean, I guess offline we can talk a little bit more about how.
I was thinking the same thing because I'm on the board.
There's opportunity there, right?
I'm on the board of a SPAC that's about to be announced for blockchain, and I think I want to talk to you about it, Patrick, because
that's definitely a space. But
I have a founder level opportunity there.
Great, I'd love to talk about that. I think let's not talk about the work first. I think one thing I really want to highlight is during the whole COVID period, we managed to, at least I managed to make it very productive. And I'm not saying just because I made it productive, people should listen to me, but just to share with the audience that I think we need to have more positive vibes. I think today's session has been great because we didn't just talk about, oh, China's great business. And so I think there's a lot of interesting, thought-provoking things we talked about. But what I did was I created a podcast show called Anything is Possible, where I interview various influencers.
Excellent, but I recommend it. It's excellent.
And it's been learning journey for myself. It's been very humbling, and also you learn from speaking to people like yourselves and also to leaders in their own different industries. But what's interesting is that passion, what Omer was mentioning about love, is that now I'm actually spending more time doing this podcast thing than the actual work. So I've had to hire people to do this, to get the camera right, the lights, to travel to Dubai. In Dubai, we've done 10 interviews already, some really, really cool stuff. And Dubai has been really great because you're able to have face-to-face interviews instead of everything on Zoom. So hopefully one day we can do this in person. But obviously Zoom is great because we can connect people from all over the world as long as there's internet. But at the end of the day, I think human connection is very important. And I think, probably going off on a tangent here, but health is the most important asset to us. Time is more important. And hopefully with these two things, you're healthy and have enough time to do something that you love and are passionate about. And hopefully, the work that we do is something that makes you get up every day.
Totally there. Amen.
Amen, man. That was the perfect benediction. I think we land the plane on that one.
Gordon, you have any closing thoughts, Gordon?
No, just really interesting. Great guys. Really interesting. Thanks.
So I'll tell you something funny. PAL, people don't know what it stands for. PAL stands for Pacific Alliance Limited. I formed it in 1996 to be a bridge between Asia and the United States for capital opportunities to bring people together to do business with each other. So it goes very back exactly to what Omer was talking about for RockTree. I think that we're at a really interesting point in time right now, and that things have broken apart, and now it's creative destruction is happening right now as we're looking at it. And I think there's going to be a new order, and I think that if you look at, to go back to blockchain and to distributed ledger, the idea of open consensus where people can communicate with each other without regard to their sex, race, nationality, politics, where you can just trust the other person and the people's base needs and desires can be addressed for communication and for exchange and for growth. That it's a big opportunity here. And I really I feel positive after this call. I really enjoyed Patrick and Omer, the way you brought out, we really talked about how people are more in common than how they're different. And I think that that's an important point for us to realize. And that's, one of the negatives of what's happening in politics right now is everyone's trying to convince you how everyone's different and how you need an enemy in order to feel good about yourself. And I think we're at a point now where there's the opportunity through business to pull people together, to communicate as friends, and to help each other, and understanding that by helping each other, we grow and we all grow together. Anyway, so thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you coming to spend the time with us. I got to follow up with Omer and with Patrick because you got business ideas like bouncing around my head like pinballs. And see you guys next week.